My name is Matthew Murdick for LIS 783 for Section Spring 2023, and I am presenting the Digital Humanities project entitled The What Project. If you hear my refrigerator, it is because my microphone is very close to it, and really I'm not in there, but when you see what this project is about, you may consider it quite ironic that you might hear a refrigerator in the background from time to time. Let's move on. So you may be asking, what is the What Project? And if my refrigerator hint wasn't enough, WHAT is an acronym that stands for Writers Have Appetites Too. And we base this on a notion that writers must write about food, right? Because their characters have to eat. And it was also based on the joke that happens within the George R. R. Martin fandom that sometimes he writes more about his food than he does about his characters. He writes more about what the characters are eating than anything about them themselves, which is false, by the way, which this project has proven. But the project developed two research questions that we should introduce to you now. The first one being, do different well-known authors whose works fall within the public domain use food descriptions in their works, and is there a notable percentage of concentration on food within those works? That is the first research question. The second research question was, do samples of fictional or non-fictional works within certain time periods suggest a cultural representation of abundance or lack of abundance, or even preferences of types of food within those time periods? And we decided to concentrate on three specific time periods: the Revolutionary War in the United States, the Civil War of the United States, and the Great Depression period of the United States through World War II. So which of these well-known authors would we want to study in order to be sure that we were getting a good sample? Well, we did want to include George R. R. Martin simply for the fact that that's what this whole project was based on. It is well recognized that George R. R. Martin is not in the public domain. His work is copyrighted, and so any research done by this had to be done through a published website entitled A Search of Ice and Fire, where we could manually search for the food tokens that we were using to search all of the other writers that we used via the Hathy Trust and their algorithms. So we did the manual search of the food tokens there, and then we originally proposed that Jane Austen, Shakespeare, Charles Dickens, Arthur Conan Doyle, Jules Verne, Louisa May Alcott, H.G. Wells, Agatha Christie, and the combined works of Charlotte, Emily, and Anne Bronte should be used. However, we found a problem with that in the fact that there was a lack of public domain works that were available in the Hathy Trust for Agatha Christie. And so we eliminated her, and as a countermeasure to that, we also eliminated one male writer as well, choosing just the last one on the list, H.G. Wells. In order to be certain that a research question can be properly answered, there must, of course, be a process. We use the Hathy Trust Research Center in order to create collections of the previously mentioned writers. And the project continued to look through those collections in order to make sure that there was no duplication of works, so that the food token count was not out of order with the regular token count. All of these collections are shared publicly, and a listing of those collections will be available via the web resource. In order to investigate and count tokens, the Hathy Trust Research Center was used using the Token Count and Tag Cloud Creator version 2.0, and additionally, the Named Entity Recognizer version 2.0 was used for a special web resource bonus that will be included in the web resource that is not necessarily related to the research questions. I'll get more to that at the end. Also, a list of food tokens had to be created in order to understand which of the works in the collections were using food tokens. 580 tokens were developed using mostly a website called The Food Coach, and the URL is in the presentation slide. That list was a little bit exotic, and it was an Australian website, so it was questioned for a few moments as to whether the What Project should become the WAAT Project, saying writers have Australian appetites too. Some other more common American and English food tokens replaced some of the tokens that were found at the Food Coach in order to make it more viable. For the development of Research Question 2, it was decided that Google Ngrams might best track certain food tokens over time. Again, the periods that were chosen were the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and the Great Depression through World War II, which served as the 5-year buffer after the Great Depression. A 5-year buffer was put before the Great Depression. All of the other ones used a 5-year buffer on either side as well in order to track a simplified list of food tokens over time. Again, using the Google Ngram algorithm, charts were developed which will be displayed at the web resource, such as the one you see pictured here now. Data processing was used in order to create answers for Research Question 1. The HathiTrust data spreadsheets were collected, and then the data was cleaned of punctuation, numerical, and non-English or undiscernible tokens. Then the food token list was compared and counts taken in order to ensure that the tokens were tabulated to get percentages. The collections themselves then had to be examined via manual keyword search in order to ensure the food token's relevance and context within the passages of the collection. This is done because the English language often presents words that are both noun and verbs by definition. As an example, is a flounder a fish, or does someone flounder about? When necessary, after those comparisons, the counts were adjusted. For Research Question 2, several things had to be considered. A 580 token list might produce an overwhelming amount of graphs to be analyzed by someone viewing the website, and so a simplified food token list was created. It consisted of states of hunger as well as some general food groups as listed here on this slide, and some more specific examples from those food groups. They were then put into the Google Ngram algorithm, and the time period parameters were 1770 to 1785 for the Revolutionary War, the Civil War 1855 to 1870, and the Great Depression 1925 to 1945, again with the intention of including a buffer for each. Screenshots were then taken of the graphs produced, all of which will be presented on the website, and those shots and the graphs themselves were analyzed for notable crests or troughs in the time periods examined. So Research Question 1 asks, how do the authors compare in using food tokens within the full bodies of their work, and is there a discernible percentage that most authors use? From our sampling, we found that all of the writers used less than 1% of the total number of tokens for food. And here is a listing of all of the authors in order. Alcott, being number 1, is the only female above 0.5%, while the Bronte sisters and Austen are well below 0.4%. This destroys that terrible axiom that women belong in the kitchen, because here we see that men like to write about food typically more than most females, at least among our sampling. What about research question 2, where we're looking at a more limited set of food tokens over the course of time periods? And these examples come from the Revolutionary War. One thing that we find is a vast inconsistency in some of the more specific food items and a pretty steady trending one way or the other over the course of time periods for more of the general categories. Right now we have displayed on the top vegetable and meat, on the bottom milk and hunger. And you can see a slight rise in hunger over the time period of the Revolutionary War itself. However, there wasn't much consistency between the food tokens that were used. Perhaps they were too general or such that they would be written about no matter what. But our test did not show any real significant changes over any of the periods. All of these graphs will be available on the web resource. While we did answer research question 2, it didn't really come to our satisfaction. We were hoping for a correlation between mentions of certain types of food or lack of mentions of certain types of food with the time periods of strife, so to speak, for the United States. So, to create a bonus, we decided to use the entity algorithm from the HathiTrust Research Center in order to isolate locations used by our writers. And then we took those locations and we did a token count of those using our token count algorithm and found the highest ranked non-fictional location that we could use. After we did that, for each of our writers and their locations, we added those locations to a Google map with a listing of foods that are currently popular at that location, not necessarily at the time of the writer. And with that said, I would like to thank you for listening to this presentation regarding the What Digital Humanities Project. The website that has all of the resources will be published on or before April 30th of 2023, and that URL will be submitted for review. Thank you very much.